I have told this story maybe 100 times now. To my own people, to humans, to children who weren't even born when it happened. And every single time, somebody stops me right at the start and says the same thing. That's not possible, he would never. And I understand why they say it. I do. Because the man I'm about to tell you about was not the kind of man who falls. Not for anyone, not for anything. I was there, I saw it happen, and I still don't fully understand it myself. So let me just tell you from the beginning, the way it actually was. My name is Sale. Back then I was young, barely past my second nomming, which for us is around what humans would call 19 or 20. I was a lexicon adept. That's a fancy word for translator. I learned languages the way some people learn to breathe, without trying, and that single skill pulled me out of a quiet life on a quiet moon and dropped me into the middle of the most important moment of my life. It dropped me onto the bridge of the Warhost flagship, the Iron Vesh, and it put me 3 steps behind the most powerful man in our part of the galaxy. Sovereign von Korath. You have to understand what that name meant to us. Among my people, the Vorthai, a sovereign was not just a leader. He was the will of an entire people made into one body. Von Korath had ended 2 wars before he was 40. He had walked into a rival fleet's command deck alone, unarmed, and walked back out with their surrender. Songs were written about him while he was still alive, which we did not do, ever, because we believed it brought bad luck. He was tall even for us, and we are a tall people. Ash-gray skin like cold stone, with thin lines of pale light running beneath it, brighter at the throat and along the jaw. When he was calm, those lines barely glowed. When he was angry, they burned. His eyes were dark, with a narrow vertical line of pupil, the kind of eyes that made you feel measured the moment they landed on you. I was terrified of him. Everyone was. That was the point. And the thing I want you to hold in your mind before I tell you the rest is this. This man had never, in his entire life, been surprised by anything. He had seen every kind of courage and every kind of cowardice. He had watched leaders beg. He had watched soldiers die without a sound. He thought he knew the whole shape of what living things could do. He was wrong, and the person who proved it to him weighed maybe 1/3 of what he did, had no weapon, no armor, no fleet behind her. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the world first, the place where all of it happened. We called it Target Seer. The humans called it Brightwell, which was a joke, I think, the kind of joke humans make when a place is hard, because there was nothing bright about it. Seer was a dust world, not a desert. A desert at least has a kind of stillness. Seer had wind, constant, screaming wind that picked up the red-brown grit of the surface and threw it across the sky in walls that turned afternoon into a kind of bruised twilight. From orbit it looked like a planet wrapped in a moving brown shroud. You could watch the storms crawl across its face like things that were alive. It was a marginal world, not the kind of place you fight a war over. It had one valuable thing: deep seams of a mineral our drives needed, the same drives the human ships needed. And so a few thousand humans had come out to the edge of nothing to dig it up. They built a settlement in the lee of a long rock ridge that broke the worst of the wind. Low buildings, half buried, connected by tunnels and covered walkways, so people could move around without being sandblasted to the bone. Generators, a water reclamation plant, greenhouses with thick, scratched panels, a landing field that had to be swept clear by machines every few hours or it simply vanished under the dust. And in the middle of it, the biggest building they had, a relief station. A hospital, really, though they called it a station, because Brightwell wasn't only miners. It was the place injured people from a dozen smaller, worse settlements got brought to. It was the one place on that whole miserable planet where someone might patch you up and keep you breathing. We didn't know any of that when we arrived. We didn't care. To us it was Target Seer, a resource world held by a young, scattered, militarily insignificant species that had wandered too far out and put its hand on something we wanted. The orders were simple: establish dominance, take the world, make the rest of them understand what it costs to be in our way. Standard. We had done it a dozen times. I had translated the surrender terms for 3 other species in my short career already. I was good at my job. I knew the words for kneel and yield, and this is no longer yours in 11 languages. I did not yet know the human word no. Not really, not the way they meant it. We came out of the dark above Seer on a gray morning. Their morning, the ship kept its own time, and the iron vesh hung over the settlement like a piece of the night that had refused to leave. You have to imagine it. A vessel longer than their entire town, blotting out a quarter of the sky, its hull lit underneath by the dull red glow of its descent engines. I was on the bridge. The Sovereign stood at the forward rail, hands clasped behind his back, watching the surface unfold on the great curved display. "They have not signaled," said First Spear Othek. He was the Sovereign's senior officer, an old soldier with a scar that split one of his light lines so it flickered. A hard man. He had wanted to simply burn the settlement from orbit and be done with it. The Sovereign had refused. "They are deciding what we are," the Sovereign said. His voice was quiet. It was always quiet. He never needed to raise it. "Let them decide." "They are deciding whether to run," Othek said. The Sovereign tilted his head just slightly. Where would they run to on a world like that? And that was true. They had nowhere to go. A few mining shuttles, none of them armed, none of them fast. A planet that would kill them in an afternoon if they walked out of their shelters. No fleet. No allies close enough to matter. We had checked. We always checked. By every measure we knew, they had already lost. The only question was how much they would bleed before they admitted it. So when the signal finally came, we expected one of 2 things: defiance, which we would crush, or begging, which we would accept. We got neither. A human face appeared on the display. A man, middle-aged, tired, with a short gray beard and lines around his eyes that had nothing to do with fear. He looked up at the camera, because they always looked up at us. We made sure of the angles, and he didn't look afraid. He looked annoyed. "This is Administrator Cole Hadley, Brightwell Settlement," he said. The translation hummed in my ear, and I spoke it for the bridge in real time, matching his tone the way a good lexicon adept does. "I don't know who you are or what you want, and frankly your timing is terrible. We've got a coolant fire in our number 2 reactor and 40 people in the medical wing who can't be moved. So whatever this is, it's going to have to wait, or you're going to have to help. Hadley out." And the signal cut. The bridge went silent. I remember First Spear Othek's light lines flaring with something close to disbelief. I remember a junior officer actually making a small sound, a kind of cough of surprise, and then going rigid, terrified he'd be noticed. Because no one talked to a sovereign of the Vorthai like that. No one had, in living memory. Kings had wept on that bridge, and a dust farmer in a dying town had just told the most feared man in the sector that he was being inconvenient. I waited for the order to burn them. It didn't come. I looked at the Sovereign, and I will never forget his face in that moment, because it was doing something I had never seen it do. He was thinking. "A fire," he said softly, almost to himself. "He is afraid of a fire in his reactor. He is not afraid of us." "He is a fool," Othek said. "No," the Sovereign said. "A fool would be afraid of us. He is afraid of the right thing." He turned from the display. "I will go down." The whole bridge moved at once. Othek stepped forward. "Sovereign, that is not." "I will go down," the Sovereign said again, and he did not raise his voice, and that was the end of it. "I want to see this place with my own eyes before I decide what to do with it. Prepare a descent escort, small. I do not need 1,000 soldiers to stand in a dust pit." His dark eyes moved across the bridge and to my horror stopped on me. "The young one, the translator, he comes." I think my soul left my body. I had never set foot off the ship in a hostile zone. I translated from a chair in a safe room. "But you do not say no to a sovereign." So I straightened up and said the words you are supposed to say, which mean my voice is yours, and I tried to keep my light lines from showing how badly I was shaking. That is how I ended up on a descent craft, dropping through that screaming brown sky toward the woman who would change everything. The landing was rough. The wind hit us like a fist on the way down, and even our pilots, who were the best in the war host, had to fight the controls. Dust hammered the hull. Through the small ports I could see nothing but churning brown. We touched down on their landing field. They'd lit it with guide beacons, which surprised me because they were helping us land even though we were there to conquer them. I learned later this was just a thing humans did. If you were coming down in a storm, they lit the field, friend or enemy. You didn't let a ship crash if you could stop it. It made no sense to me then. The ramp came down and the wind came in, and it was like nothing I had felt. Hot, gritty, full of teeth. I pulled my collar up. The Sovereign walked straight out into it as if it were a spring breeze, and we followed, 12 of us, soldiers in dark armor with the Sovereign at the center and me trailing behind like a frightened shadow. And there, waiting at the edge of the field, was the human delegation. It was so much smaller than I expected. Just a handful of people in dust cloaks and breathing masks. Administrator Hadley, the gray-bearded man, was in front, but my eye went past him because behind him stood someone who didn't fit. She wasn't dressed like the others. She wore a medical coat, pale once, now streaked with gray dust and something darker that I would later understand was blood. Her sleeves were pushed up. She had a mask pushed down around her neck like she'd forgotten to put it back up. Her hair was pulled back hard and coming loose at the edges. She looked exhausted in a way that went all the way down to the bone. And she was looking at us, at the Sovereign, at the soldiers, at the weapons, with an expression I could not read at all. Not fear, not awe, something more like impatience, like we were a problem she did not have time for. Hadley started to speak. Formal words, careful words, the kind of words a man uses when he's standing in front of someone who can end his world. I began to translate. And the woman cut him off. She just walked forward, past the administrator, past the line of soldiers who tensed and shifted their weapons toward her, and she stopped in front of the Sovereign close, closer than anyone in their right mind would stand, and she looked up at him, all the long way up, and she said, "You're the one in charge." I froze, the soldiers froze. I had to translate it. I did, my voice cracking. The Sovereign looked down at this small human standing in his shadow and he said, "I am." She said, "Then I'm going to be straight with you because I don't have time to be polite. I'm Dr. Mara Holt. I run the medical wing. We have a reactor fire, and if it spreads to the secondary line, the whole power grid goes. And if the grid goes, I lose climate control and oxygen recycling in the wing where I've got 40 people who can't breathe on their own." She didn't blink. "Your ship has fire suppression and power systems that make ours look like campfires, so you've got two choices. You can stand here and do your big scary speech, and people are going to die while you do it. Or you can help me. I genuinely do not care which one you pick, but pick fast." I have never in my life translated anything so quickly and so quietly. I half expected, with every word, for a soldier to cut her down. The Sovereign did not move. His light lines were very still. "You are giving me orders," he said. "I'm giving you a choice," she said. "There's a difference. Are you going to take it or not?" And here is the moment. Here is the exact moment if I have to point at one. Because I was watching his face, and I saw something cross it that I had never seen there before in all my time near him. Curiosity. Real, alive curiosity. The look of a man who has been bored for a very long time without knowing it, and has just heard a sound he doesn't recognize. "Show me the fire," he said. "I want to stop here for a second and tell you what I understood later, looking back, that I didn't understand then. The Sovereign had spent his whole life surrounded by people who feared him. Every word anyone said to him was shaped by that fear. Even Othek, who was brave, who would die for him, spoke to him like a man speaking to a force of nature. People begged him, flattered him, obeyed him, plotted against him. But no one ever just talked to him. No one ever stood in front of him and treated him like a person who could be useful. And here was this small, exhausted, dust-covered woman, who clearly knew exactly who and what he was, who had every reason to be on her knees. And she had looked at the most powerful being for 1,000 light years in any direction and seen, before anything else, a working power grid she could use. To her, in that moment, he wasn't a conqueror. He was a big enough generator to keep her patience alive. I think no one had ever been that useful to him in his life or made him feel it. I think it cracked something open. He just didn't know it yet. Neither did I. We went into the settlement. The wind dropped the moment we got under the rock ridge and into the covered walkways, and suddenly I could hear again. And what I heard surprised me as much as anything. Voices, people calling out, the hum of machinery, a child crying somewhere and a parent's voice soothing it. Life. Crowded, loud, struggling, ordinary life. I had expected a defeated people huddling in the dark. Instead, I walked into the middle of an emergency, and the whole place was moving. Humans ran past us carrying equipment, hauling hoses, and they barely glanced at us, at 12 armored alien soldiers and a sovereign, because they had a fire to fight, and that was more important. That, more than anything, told me these people were not what we had been told they were. Dr. Holt led us at a hard walk, talking the whole time over her shoulder, half to us and half into a comm unit pressed to her ear. Reactor 2's in the lower level. Fire team's been on it 40 minutes and they're losing. It's an electrical chemical fire, water makes it worse, and our suppression foam reserves are almost gone. She glanced back at the Sovereign. What have you got? The Sovereign looked at Othek. Othek, stone-faced, having every second of this, said into his own comm, "Bring down a suppression unit and a power coupling team. Full priority." I translated. Holt's eyes widened just slightly, the first crack in her hard surface, and then she nodded once and kept moving. Okay, that might do it this way. We came down into the lower level and the heat hit us before we saw the flames. The corridor was full of smoke, thick and chemical, lit orange from the far end. Human firefighters were there, faces black, working a losing battle against a wall of fire that was eating its way along a row of power conduits. And here is the thing I remember most clearly, the thing that I think the Sovereign remembered too, for the rest of his life. A man went down. One of the human firefighters close to the flames simply collapsed, overcome by the smoke or the heat or both, and fell right at the edge of the fire, close enough that his coat began to smoke. And before any of us could react, before the soldiers could even decide whether they cared, Dr. Holt was already moving. She ran straight toward the fire. I shouted I don't even know what some vor thy word, because it was insane. The flames were right there, the heat was a physical wall, but she didn't stop. She got low under the worst of the smoke, grabbed the fallen man by the back of his coat with both hands and hauled. She was small. He was not. She dug her boots in and pulled, and her face was a mask of pure effort, and the fire was close enough that I saw it shine on the sweat on her skin. She got him back a meter, 2. Not enough. He was dead weight and she was failing, and she would not let go, and the fire was reaching for both of them now. And then a shadow moved past me. The Sovereign. He crossed that burning corridor in 3 strides, faster than I had ever seen him move, his armor lighting up with the heat shielding our soldiers' suits carry, the same shielding that lets us walk through plasma fire for short bursts. He didn't say anything. He just bent down, took the fallen man in one arm and gripped Dr. Holt's shoulder with his other hand, and pulled both of them back, out of the heat, in one smooth, enormous motion. They came clear of the fire together, the man, the doctor, and the Sovereign of the Vorthai. All 3 on the ground in a tangle of smoke and dust. And the suppression unit chose that exact moment to arrive, our soldiers dragging the heavy cylinder down the corridor, and Othek hit the fire with everything it had, and a wave of suppression mist rolled down the passage and the flames died, all at once, like a held breath let go. Silence, just coughing and the hiss of the cooling units and the dripping of suppressant from the ceiling. Dr. Holt was on her hands and knees, gasping. The fallen man was breathing, a medic was already on him. And she looked up through the smoke at the sovereign who was kneeling beside her, his great dark form streaked with soot, his light lines flickering from the heat. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she said between coughs, "Okay, that I did not expect." And the sovereign of the Vorthai, the man who had ended 2 wars, who had never been surprised by anything, looked back at her and said, very quietly, "Nor did I." I don't think he was talking about the fire. After that, things changed, though slowly, and not all at once, and not the way you might think. We did not conquer Brightwell that day, or the next. The sovereign declared a pause in operations to assess the strategic value of the world. That is what he called it. Othek and the other officers grumbled, because it was nonsense. The strategic value was the mineral seams, and we already knew about those. But the sovereign had given an order, and so the war host waited in orbit, and a small command post was set up at the edge of the settlement, and we stayed. I stayed because I was the translator, and someone had to bridge the words. So I was there for a great deal of what came next, more than almost anyone. The sovereign began to inspect the settlement. That is what he called it. He would go down in the mornings with a small escort, and he would walk through Brightwell and look at things, the greenhouses, the water plant. The schools, they had schools, even there, even at the edge of nothing, rooms full of human children learning their letters. He looked at all of it with that same new expression, that careful, hungry curiosity. And somehow, every single one of these inspections ended up at the medical station. I noticed it before he did, I think. The way his route always bent that way. The way he would slow down when he got near the medical wing. The way he found reasons to ask questions that only Dr. Holt could answer. She, for her part, did not slow down for anyone. She was the busiest person I have ever met. The medical wing never stopped. There were always new injured coming in from the mines, from the smaller settlements, from accidents the harsh world handed out without mercy. She worked impossible hours. She slept in a cot in a back room when she slept at all. And when the most powerful man in the sector came to inspect her hospital, she put him to work. I am not exaggerating. The first time the sovereign walked into the medical wing without a reactor on fire, Dr. Holt looked up from a patient, saw him standing there in his armor with his soldiers, and said, "Good, you're tall. I need that supply crate off the top shelf, the green one, can you reach it?" The soldiers went rigid. I nearly choked translating it. The sovereign of the Vorthai looked at the shelf and looked at her, and there was a long, dangerous pause. And then he reached up, took down the green crate, and set it on the table beside her. "Thank you," she said, already moving on to the next thing, as if it were nothing, as if she had not just ordered a god to fetch a box. I watched his face. I will never forget his face. He looked pleased. I should tell you about her properly, because the more I knew her, the more I understood why it happened. Mara Holt was not a soft person. I want to be clear about that because the story has been softened over the years and people imagine some gentle healer with kind eyes. She did have kind eyes sometimes when she let herself, but mostly she was sharp. Sharp tongue, sharp mind, no patience at all for nonsense. She had come out to see her, I learned, after losing a hospital, a real hospital, on a real colony world, somewhere safer and richer, to something I never fully understood, some collapse, some failure of the people who were supposed to fund it. She'd watched patients she could have saved die because someone far away decided it wasn't worth the cost. So she'd come to the worst place she could find, where no one would ever again tell her a patient wasn't worth saving, because out here, nobody else wanted the job. Out here, she was the whole hospital. The buck stopped at her and went no further. That was the thing about her that I think undid the sovereign completely. She had power, real power, over life and death, every single day, and she used all of it for other people. Strangers, people who could give her nothing back. She had nothing to gain and she gave everything anyway, not out of weakness, not out of fear, but out of a kind of fierce, stubborn decision about the kind of person she was going to be. The sovereign had spent his life around power. He understood power. He had more of it than anyone alive, and he had never, not once, seen anyone use it the way she used hers. I think he didn't have a word for what she was. I think that's why he kept coming back. He was trying to understand a thing he had no language for. And I, a translator, a person whose entire life was about finding words for things, could only watch, because I had no word for it either. The other Vorthai were not pleased. I should be honest about that, because it matters for what came later. First Spear Othek watched the sovereign's visits to the medical wing with a growing darkness. To Othek, it was simple. We had come to take a world. We were not taking it. The sovereign was spending his days fetching crates for a human woman while the war host sat idle in orbit, and every day we waited, our enemies elsewhere grew bolder, and the soldiers grew confused, and the songs that praised the sovereign started to sound, just slightly, like questions. "You are losing them," Othek told the sovereign one evening in the command post, not knowing I was close enough to hear, or perhaps not caring. "The war host. They followed you because you were certain. Now they watch you wander through a dust town and they do not understand. A sovereign who does not know his own mind is a sovereign who will not be one for long." The sovereign was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Do you know what she said to me today, Othek?" "I do not care what she said." "She said that our medical sciences are centuries ahead of theirs, and that with one cargo transfer we could prevent every child on this world from dying of the lung rot they get from the dust. One transfer, nothing to us. And she asked me, not begged, asked whether I was the kind of person who would do that or the kind who wouldn't." He turned to look at his oldest soldier. "No one has ever asked me what kind of person I am, Othek, in my whole life. Everyone already decided, including you." Othek's light lines flickered. "And what did you answer her?" "I haven't yet," the sovereign said. "I'm still deciding." I remember Othek's face going hard and cold. And I remember thinking, with a kind of sick certainty in my stomach, this is going to go very wrong before it goes right. I was correct, but that is part two. For now, let me end where the trouble truly began. It was about 3 weeks after the fire. The pause had held. The settlement had almost started to relax, as much as a town under the shadow of a warship can relax. The sovereign and the doctor had fallen into a kind of rhythm. He came in the mornings. She put him to work. They argued often about medicine, about power, about whether his people or hers had the right to that miserable world. She gave no ground. He gave no ground either, but I noticed he gave it to her more than he had ever given it to anyone. And one evening, after the medical wing had quieted, I found them on the observation deck, a high platform on the rock ridge, the one place in Brightwell where you could see the open sky when the storms cleared. The storms had cleared that night. The dust had settled and the stars had come out, thick and bright, the way they only get on a world with no light to drown them. They were standing at the rail, not quite touching, looking up. I should have announced myself. I didn't. I was young and curious, and I hid in the shadow by the door and I watched, and I am not proud of it, but if I hadn't, this story would have a hole in it. "On my world," the sovereign was saying, "we have no stars, too much light. A child grows up never seeing them. I was 40 years old the first time I stood somewhere dark enough to see the sky like this." He paused. "I have conquered worlds with skis like this, and never once looked up." Mara Holt was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard." "Is it?" "You had the whole sky and you never looked." She shook her head. "Yeah, that's the saddest thing I've ever heard." He turned to look at her. And there was something in the way he turned, something careful, something almost shy, which is not a word anyone had ever used about Von Korath, that made my chest go tight even from the shadows. "I am looking now," he said. And he wasn't looking at the stars. She knew it too. I saw her go still. I saw her understand exactly what he meant, and I saw her, for the first time since I had met her, this fearless woman who ordered sovereigns to fetch crates, not know what to say. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The wind was gone. The stars burned overhead. And the most powerful man in 1,000 light years stood beside a tired human doctor on a rock at the edge of nothing. And I understood, with the clarity you only get when you witness something true, that something had just happened that could not be taken back. Then Mara Holt did the bravest thing I saw her do. In all the brave things I saw her do. She didn't run from it. "You know this is impossible," she said quietly. "You know that, right? You're a sovereign, you came here to take this world, my world, and she laughed, a small broken sound. "I'm a doctor in a dust pit who hasn't slept properly in a year." "I know what you are," he said. "Do you?" "You are the first person in my life," he said, "who looked at me and was not afraid, who saw what I could do and thought only of who it could help. You are the first person who made me wonder what I might have been if I had been born somewhere with stars." His voice dropped, low and rough. "I have a word for you, Mara Holt, in my language. We have a word for the thing a person becomes when they make you want to be better than you are. There is no fear in the word. There is only, and here even he, the man who needed no words, seemed to run out of them. There is no translation. I am sorry. I would give it to you if I could." And from my hiding place I realized, with a jolt, that he was right. There was no translation. I knew our language better than almost anyone alive, and I could not have rendered that word into human speech without breaking it. Some things only exist whole, in the language they were born in. She looked up at him. The stars were in her eyes. "Try," she said. And he was about to. I swear he was about to. He opened his mouth to give her the thing he had never given anyone. And that was the exact moment the sky lit up. A blue-white flash, high above, brighter than any star. Then another. Then the dull, distant thunder that is not thunder, that is something far worse, rolling down out of the dark. Ships coming out of the deep, not ours. The sovereign moved before the second flash had faded, his whole body changing in an instant from the man on the observation deck back into the warlord the galaxy feared. His calm was already in his hand. Othek's voice was already in his ear, and even from where I hid I could hear it, sharp and urgent, and, I would swear to this, just slightly satisfied. "Sovereign, hostile fleet translating in at the system edge. The Korath conquered. They have come for the mineral world." A pause. "And they have come for you." The doctor stared up at the burning sky. The sovereign stared at the doctor. And whatever word he had been about to give her went unspoken, and stayed unspoken, and the war came down on Brightwell like the storm that never stops. People always ask me what war looks like from the inside. I tell them the truth. It doesn't look like the songs. It doesn't look like the recordings the war host made of itself, all clean lines and glory. From the inside, war looks like a hospital corridor that won't stop filling up. It looks like a doctor who hasn't slept in 2 days deciding, with her own 2 hands, who gets the last unit of blood substitute. It looks like a young translator standing in a doorway with nothing to do and nowhere to hide, watching the people he has come to care about run out of time. That's what the Korath conquered brought to Brightwell, not glory, a hospital that wouldn't stop filling up. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. I always do with this part. Let me slow down. Let me tell it the way it happened. The night the sky lit up, the sovereign left the observation deck at a run, and I ran after him, and Mara Holt ran the other way toward her medical wing, because she already knew, the way she always knew, that whatever was coming, the broken bodies would come to her. I didn't see her again for almost a full day. By the time I did, the war had already changed everything. Up in orbit, the Iron Vesh and the rest of the war host met the Korath conquered fleet, and the 2 of them tore at each other in the dark above that little world. I won't pretend I understood the battle. I'm a translator, not a tactician. But I understood the shape of it, the way you understand a storm even if you can't name the winds. The conquered had come in numbers, more ships than we had. They were a wealthy power, an old power, the kind of civilization that buys its strength rather than earning it, and they had wanted the mineral seams of Seer for a long time. When their scouts saw a Vorthai war host sitting idle over the world doing nothing, paused, confused, leaderless in spirit if not in name, they saw their chance. Take the world, and take the head of the most famous warlord in the sector while it was distracted. They almost did. The first day was bad. We lost 2 escort cruisers in the opening hours. The Iron Vesh took a hit that knocked out a quarter of her forward batteries, and down on the surface the Conquered did the thing the Sovereign would never have done. They fired on the settlement. Not heavily, not to destroy it, just enough. A precise strike on the edge of Brightwell, on the landing field and the outer storage domes to make a point. We can reach you. Hand over the world, Vorthai, or we will take it apart one dome at a time, and you will have spent your fleet protecting dust. The wounded started coming into Mara's hospital that first night, and never really stopped. I want to tell you about Othek now, because this is where he made his choice, and I have thought about it for many years, and I still don't fully know what was in his heart. Othek was not a bad man. I need to say that. People who hear this story want him to be a villain, simple and clean, and he wasn't. He was an old soldier who loved his sovereign and loved his people, and he watched both of them being put at risk for a dust world and a human woman, and something in him broke. On the second day, with the battle in the balance, Othek went to the sovereign and laid it out plain. I was there. The command post had been moved into the rock ridge below ground, safer. The sovereign stood over a tactical display that showed the whole ugly situation in light and shadow. He looked tired in a way I had never seen, soot still on him from somewhere, his light lines low. We cannot win this and hold the world, Othek said. Not both. The Conquered outnumbers us and they do not care about the settlement. We do. That is our weakness and they have found it. He paused. There is a way out, Sovereign, a clean one. Say it. We give them the world. Othek's voice was flat, a soldier delivering hard news. We withdraw the war host to high orbit, we let the Conquered land and take Brightwell, and we strike them when they are committed to the ground and their fleet is thin. We win the battle, we save the war host, we save our people. A beat. We lose the settlement, the humans, but Sovereign, they were never ours to lose. We came to conquer them, they are not our people, they never were. It was, I have to admit, good strategy, cold and correct, the kind of strategy that had made Othek the right hand of a sovereign. The sovereign was quiet for a long time. How many in the settlement? He finally said. Sovereign. How many, Othek? Othek's jaw tightened. Perhaps 4,000, most in the lower levels. The medical wing holds the worst of them, the ones who cannot be moved. 40 who cannot breathe on their own, the sovereign said softly, and I knew he was remembering her words from the very first signal before any of this. 40 people who can't breathe on their own. If we withdraw and let the Conquered land, what happens to those 40? Othek didn't answer. Say it first, Spear. You have never been afraid of words before. They die, Othek said. When the grid is taken, they die, as do most of the rest in the fighting. He stepped closer and his voice dropped and there was real pain in it. Vaughn. I have followed you since before you were a sovereign. I have watched you make hard choices 1,000 times. I have never once seen you choose 4,000 strangers over your own people. This is not you. That woman she has put something in your head and it is going to get us all killed, and I am asking you as the oldest friend you have left to be the man I followed. Make the cold choice. Save our people. Let the dust have the rest. And the sovereign looked at him, and I saw, for the first time, that the two of them were standing on opposite sides of a line that could not be uncrossed. You're right that she put something in my head, the sovereign said. But you're wrong about what it is. Then what is it? A question. He looked back at the display, at the little point of light that was Brightwell. She asked me what kind of person I am, and for the first time in my life, Othek, I find that I want the answer to be true. Othek stared at him. Then very quietly he said, "Then you will lose them all anyway, because a sovereign who chooses strangers over his soldiers does not stay sovereign long enough to save anyone." He stepped back. He saluted the old way, the formal way, the way you salute a leader you are about to stop following. "I will give the order to prepare for withdrawal. When you come to your senses, it will be ready." And he left. That, by the way, was not the betrayal. People think that was the betrayal. It wasn't. Othek was honest to the sovereign's face. The betrayal came later, and it was quieter, and it was worse, because it was done out of love, which is the worst reason of all. I need to tell you about the hospital now, about what it had become. By the third day, Mara Holt's medical wing held humans and Vorthai side by side. I want you to understand how strange that was. How impossible. 3 days earlier we had come to conquer these people. Now our wounded soldiers, men hurt when a conquered strike clipped the command post, men hurt in the orbital fighting and brought down, lay in human beds, in a human hospital, tended by human hands. Because the war host's own medical bays were on the Iron Vesh, and the Iron Vesh was busy not dying, and so the wounded came down to the only hospital on the world. Hers. And she took them. Of course she took them. I asked her about it once later, why she'd treated the soldiers of the army that had come to enslave her world. She looked at me like I'd asked something stupid. "They were hurt," she said. "I'm a doctor." That's the whole sentence, Sale. They were hurt and I'm a doctor. There's nothing after that. There was nothing after that. I started spending my days in the hospital because I was the translator, and now there were Vorthai soldiers who couldn't tell the human medics where it hurt. So I became the voice between them. A frightened young Vorthai soldier, far from home, dying maybe, and a human doctor leaning over him, and me in the middle carrying the words. "It hurts here. I'm going to help you. Hold still. You're going to be all right. Tell me your name." His name is, she wants to know your name. Names. I carried so many names back and forth in those days. I think that's when I understood what Mara had understood from the very first moment. That underneath the fleets and the songs and the conquering, it was all just people with names, hurting, and other people choosing whether or not to help. The sovereign came to the hospital on the third night. He had not slept. He stood in the doorway of the wing where his wounded soldiers lay in human beds, and he watched Mara move between them, between his men and her own, treating them the same, no difference, no hesitation, and I saw his face do the thing again. But it wasn't curiosity anymore. It had gone past that. It was something steadier and deeper, and I thought, a little bit afraid. The way you look at the one thing you cannot afford to lose. She felt him watching. She always did. She crossed to him, wiping her hands, exhausted past the point where exhaustion even shows. "Your people are fighting well," she said. "I can tell. The injuries are getting fewer. You're winning, aren't you?" "We are holding," he said. "Holding is not winning. To win, I must do something I have been told I cannot do." "What's that?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I must refuse to leave." She understood. She understood everything always, faster than anyone. I saw it land on her, the realization that there was a version of this where his army simply pulled back and let the conquered roll over Brightwell, and that he was, against all sense, against all the advice of his soldiers, choosing not to take it. "Vaughn," she said, and it was the first time I'd heard her use his name, just his name, not his title. "Don't do something stupid because of me. These are my people. This is my job, to stand between them and the dark. It's not yours. You don't owe us anything. You came here to take this place. No one would blame you for." "I would," he said. 3 days of war in 2 words. "I would blame me," he said again, quieter. "You asked what kind of person I am. I have spent 40 years being the kind that everyone already decided I was. I am very tired, Mara Holt. I would like, before the end, to be the kind I choose." He paused. "Even if the end comes because of it." And she looked up at him. This small, fierce, impossibly tired woman, and her eyes were bright, and she said the thing I will remember until I die. "Then we'll be that kind together," she said, "and if the dark wants my people, it can come through both of us." I had to leave the room. I'm not ashamed to say it. I was young, and I had never seen two people decide to stand in front of a galaxy for each other, and I couldn't watch it without my own light lines giving me away. The betrayal came on the fourth day. Othek did it out of love. I keep saying that because it's the part people don't want to hear, and it's the part that's true. He had watched his sovereign choose the dust world. He had watched the war host grow confused and afraid as their leader spent the most dangerous battle of his life worrying about a human hospital. And Othek, who loved Von Korath more than he loved his own life, decided that the only way to save his sovereign was to take the choice away from him. So he did the cold thing, the strategic thing. He went behind the sovereign's back and he opened a channel to the Korath conquered, and he offered them a trade. The settlement for the sovereign's life.